So, for this panel, I would like to introduce Nick Mitchell, Vice President, Sales Support Group of Diversified, Rob Badenoch, Partner at Tad Associates, and John Garmendi, Senior Manager, Consultant, Program Development at Sony Electronics. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Steph.
Hey, good afternoon.
So I would like to start by just, if y'all want to go around and just kind of like introduce yourselves and talk about your background a little bit, just in the context of what we're going to be talking about today. That'd be lovely. Rob, you want to start us off?
Okay. So I'm Rob Badenoch, partner at Tad Associates. I represent, I suppose, the consulting side of things for this panel discussion and look forward to speaking about the range of issues here from that perspective. Tad Associates, quick introduction, is obviously a design consultancy, but equal parts media and content creation agency. And we pride ourselves on designing experiences with equal interest and priority assigned to the human involved in the mix, not just the technology and the underpinning issues surrounding design. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. John?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone on the West Coast. As Steph said, my name is John Garmendi. I wear a couple of hats at Sony. I lead our sales support engineering team, as well as lead the outreach and program development for our architects and consultant community. I've been with Sony for quite a long time, and within that time have had a number of roles. And it's kind of funny that I started out as a sales support engineer for display many years ago when projectors still had CRTs, and have seen so many changes and the entire evolution to where we are today. So, I'm excited to be here, and excited to bring at least one manufacturer's or the manufacturer perspective to this conversation.
Awesome. And finally, Nick.
Hey, Nick Mitchell. So I lead our sales support group at Diversified, focusing mostly in the workplace or traditional AV, advanced visual environments division. And so I lead the team of sales support engineers that we jump into any manner of opportunities and assist our account executives on design build, RFP responses, working with consultants to basically bring the designs to life. So I've been in the industry for about 13 years, started at a manufacturer for a few years, and then moved into integration. And I've been with Diversified since 2017. Before that, I was part of one of the acquisitions so I've been able to see Diversified grow tremendously since we got acquired in the Mid-Atlantic, and definitely excited to be here and have the opportunity to talk about the trends in DV-LED.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got y'all three are like perfect, like different corners of our industry to give like really good perspective. So let's go ahead and jump in. So like I said at the beginning, DV-LED, the price definitely has decreased recently. So it's now a more accessible option for everyone to put it in installations. So as this continues, are we going to start seeing DV-LED in places where we weren't seeing it last year? Like what new places and what new installations can we expect?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in to just kick it off, I guess. I think with the price decreasing, you're going to see many more customers have the opportunity to put DV-LED in spaces that were cost prohibitive in the past few years. There's all sorts of applications where, we're being requested for different wow factor elements to we'll probably talk about this later, but, to draw people back into the workplace. We're still kind of coming out of COVID where, most end users that we're working with are remote, but we're getting back into that hybrid, and a lot of requests come in to draw people back in. So having an experiential DV-LED deployment that they can use for multi-purpose spaces, employee events, customer events, different unique digital signage applications, those things are popping up more and more. And that's, I think the trend that's going to increase. You're going to start seeing all different locations that are going to have DV-LED in place of traditional LCD monitors or video walls.
I'm certainly reminded of this interesting convergence, a perfect storm of factors that have occurred now with the return to workplace. Nick mentions workplace, and the importance of that vertical for us is very clear. This converging of hospitality and workplace, which is in response largely to the need to make the office attractive for a returning workforce, and a workforce that has many new options of where to work, speaks to the need for wow factor. Again, Nick's term here is appropriate. And to design interesting and delightful experiences for engagements and entry of buildings and so forth, wayfinding, of course.
Right.
But it's really a function of change management. The importance of signage and how digital canvases can be applied to interior architecture to drive change, to instruct, to guide, to form the digital component of an experience than an otherwise rote technology solution. The sign that says menus one day, critical health information the next, but then when you approach it, detects your presence and says, did you know you can share your device and connect with your colleagues from other offices elsewhere in the world? That's central to the work we do, to be able to specify these things as something other than repurposed consumer televisions or digital LCD screens. DV-LED, it makes it possible to make them arbitrary sizes and shapes, and that's a big part of this, I would say.
Right. And jumping in here, I see we have Jeff joining us now. Jeff, if you want to quick introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background with DV-LED.
Sure. I'm Jeff Blankensap. I am the Senior Director of Sales for the Central Region here at Peerless AV. And I've been with Peerless for about 10 years now, and we are heavily focused on DV-LED mounting solutions. And mounting LED display technology is much different than LCD. You need a much higher knowledge base to do it successfully. It's a precision type of product, and it does require a lot of new traits to be successful at it. And this kind of session is great because we can help sort of spread the word on some of the best approaches for mounting LED. It's a beautiful digital canvas that can pretty much go anywhere. The limitation is the brain really trying to come up with super cool solutions and experiences for customers in different types of environments. So really excited to be on the call, and yeah, let's chat.
Fantastic. You said a term that I want to bring up. You talked about digital canvas and digital canvassing. So that kind of leads the next question that I want to ask. So we talked about what trends in DV-LED installations we can see in the next year, but now I would like to ask, what trends and types of content are we seeing for DV-LED? So you have that digital canvassing and other really interactive content that really works for this type of screen.
Let me jump in here. I think that I love Jeff's term, the digital canvassing. Yeah. And I think that as we look, combining the two questions, right, as we look across the newer trends in terms of implementation and usage, combined with content that's really going to differentiate the experience for the viewers, or maybe even more appropriate to not even call them viewers but participants, at this point. And again, going back to applications, I look at one great example, I think, is transportation, where we're looking at an airport or a transportation hub as now not only the signage is just not informational, but there's a blending, if you will, of a retail environment and even an entertainment experience. So we now take a utilitarian environment and really turn it truly into an experience. So I think back to your question, Steph, the content really plays a big part in that.
Yeah, that's the number one thing that we bring up as soon as we identify, hey, DV-LED is going to be a great solution here. It's going to be immersive, going to attract people. What can it be used for? It can be used for advertising, like you said, in almost that retail sense. And what's the experience going to be like for the end users? So with traditional LCD digital monitors in the past, sometimes our end users, the content's an afterthought. It's like, hey, we can put up a PowerPoint or something like that on the display. But really, if you want to get the best bang for the buck when you're putting in a digital signage application, you want to have a strategy around that. And so the retail, the advertisement, the interactivity, those pieces of the content are definitely things we want to identify early on in the process. So that's the number one item we tell our customers to think about right away.
Oh yeah, for sure. I hear that all the time where an integrator will go in and the client is like, yeah, I want 8K screens. And they're like, yeah, great. What are you playing on it? PowerPoints. Like, an 8K screen for that? But okay.
I should mention our clients have become so much more sophisticated in recent years because of the prevalence of screens that have potentially arbitrary aspect ratios. Ultra wide screens, which are available in LCD now, but have always been an option with DV LED indoor installations. You can make them any size shape you want within cost constraints, which I assume we'll talk about here as well. But the client who says, this is a heavily curated corporate presentation environment, nothing will be on this screen unless it's been produced.
Right.
That's a client that understands the need for branded content, corporate communications, backgrounds, and other things that can be residing in as the backdrop to the presentation material, to the boring PowerPoint. And the client understands that and treats it like any other production environment, versus the ad hoc workroom, which is today, interestingly, affected by these, for example, Microsoft Front Row, ultra widescreen 21:9 displays, becoming important because it's no longer just this image of our Hollywood squares, but also a chat thread on the left and a calendar on the right. And there's much more content being involved in what would otherwise just be video conferencing or presentation. The two things are happening simultaneously with our online work environment being displayed on the sides. So to have screens technology that can be stretched arbitrarily is a new important thing. And it's our own clients that are challenging us to solve for this. They are asking for it. It depends on the application, of course.
Yeah, that's a great point. Since the remote or hybrid workforce, we've gotten into that mode where people are going back in the conference spaces. That's been the number one request for most of our clients is, hey, how do we bring the experience that we're all used to being remote for the past, year and a half, 2 years into the conference rooms? They don't want that single camera overlooking from, above everyone's head. They want an immersive experience so that the remote participants feel like they're included in the meeting, just as if they were sitting there. So that's dependent on a lot of things. The platforms, you have Teams, Zoom functionality, you have new innovations in camera technologies, and obviously those things play a factor when we're specifying DV LED walls and sizes, like Rob mentioned. So it's definitely, that's another one of the trends in the enterprise and vertical.
Do you think that this is, oh, go ahead, John. I'm so sorry.
No, I was just to add on to what Nick said. I think it's important to, as people do return back to work, their expectation is not to step back in terms of their experience. And I think the tricky part, and when Rob is working with his clients in the design phase, is really to be able to address how to give both ends of the conversation, if you will, the same experience, or better experience than what they had prior to COVID, given what they've experienced in the past 2 years, and now what they bring back in terms of an expectation.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to ask, so my next question, do you think that this is necessary for AV to be brought into the conversation much earlier for these installations? Because I know in typical installations, everyone usually brings in AV last. It's the last thing everyone thinks of. They've already built their conference room and, oh, whoops, it's made of glass. And so they're like, all right, yeah, y'all figure that out. But do you think that this is going to be a trend with more knowledgeable clients, so therefore they bring you guys in earlier into the conversation?
Well, I'll offer, I sit from a position of luxury being a consultant. It's typically not an issue that we're too late in the process as compared to many integrators. And it's absolutely something we initially flag. If there is going to be a direct view LED display, traditionally they are much heavier in power and heat load than their equivalent display technology. And suddenly we're on the radar of the building engineer who is concerned to evacuate heat and balance the the panel loads, and we have to be very clear as to what the experience requirement is and the impact that can have on power and heat. Does ambient conditions require that it be particularly bright? Is it indoors versus outdoors? What's the pixel pitch? Are the power supplies remote? So the opportunity to flag this early absolutely requires that we be part of the initial strategy and then later schematic and design development of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. Normally not an issue when a consultant is involved, but that is definitely one of the challenges, Steph. We're always being brought in maybe a design build effort or something like that, where the architectural design and infrastructure is so far ahead of where they should have brought in someone to talk about technology that we're having to try to squeeze the technology in to fit the existing space, and the appetite to do changes on the construction plans and things like that at that point are not desirable. So definitely a challenge. We urge our end users, the architectural firms that we work with, that we need to be brought in early and often to discuss those infrastructure requirements to ensure successful deployment, and that we're getting the right solution in their space for their needs.
I should also mention, we were just talking about content a minute ago. It's interesting to point out that the content and the experience demands of our clients can reach back to the initial planning stages of the infrastructure. Is it static, full white field, high brightness? Is that a content decision made typically very late in the process? That has an impact on the heat loss and power draw of the display with DV LED.
Sure.
That's a good point, Rob. I was also going to jump in terms of early engagement. One of the things that's changed, right, as a result of COVID, I know that we're all kind of dealing with it a little bit, is our lead times and supply chain management and all of that. And I think that has to be part of the conversation early on. And Jeff, as a manufacturer as well, can probably speak to that. But it's important that from a design perspective, as Nick and Rob have mentioned, but from a project timeline and are we going to have everything we need when we do need it? I think it's important to be able to have these early conversations, and for us to be able to provide our factory and the other parts of our supply chain with as much heads up as possible. And then the other thing that I keyed in on when Nick was speaking is that I think we're all involved in a little bit of education. Those in the architectural community, the architects tend to work maybe in a world that doesn't always necessarily address well or even aware of the particular requirements for AV. So I think we all have to do what we can to educate those folks.
For sure. We had a question come in from the audience. So it is 8K sounds great, but with most 4K displays not being placed in a way that make the benefits of the higher resolution as available to the user, aside from systems that need a higher, more flexible canvas, is building systems heavily based toward 4K and 8K really a now concept, or is it really building for far off future that clients may not see right now?
It's a good question.
Can I give the cliche consultant answer, which is it depends?
Classic.
The visual acuity issues surrounding resolution and how that affects the architecture of the space come to bear on this. How close to the screen is the audience sitting? Is it a canvas with multiple tens or hundreds of thumbnail windows that a person is expected to approach and inspect at very close range? Suddenly 8K is not enough depending on the size, interestingly, but typically 1080p is perfectly fine if you're not sitting any further than 9 or 10 or 20 feet. And of course, the displays we know from outdoors, what is the pixel pitch of a display in Times Square? Greater than 20 millimeters, I'm sure. So it absolutely depends on the application and the challenge set by the client. That's my jumping in to get that started.
Yeah, I mean, Totally agree. I mean, that's what it comes down to. When we talk about DVLED, we're not necessarily leading with, hey, what pixel pitch are we going to sell? It's all about the content and what the workflow for that space or what the functional requirements are. That is going to ultimately dictate, along with the viewing distance, what pixel pitch is going to be specified, and ultimately what the resolution for the content is going to need to be to follow that. And so you're exactly right. You know, the 8K, yeah, it does sound great. And you need a lot of video, you need a lot of processing ahead of the video wall to usually split that up depending on the pitch of the wall. But yeah, the size, you know, the environment that the LED wall is going into, and like you said, where the people are going to be viewing the content from is the major factor there.
But it's such an exquisite example of the architectural and experience program, the requirements set by the client, again, cutting straight to the core of audiovisual technology selection. And when the issue of what it is they expect to see and how they expect to experience this content is drawn next to what the costs of these technologies are per square foot and what the power and heat load and infrastructure and mounting requirements are, clearly we're playing with live ammunition when we're having these discussions with clients as to what these displays are supposed to do. So it's a great example for our industry of getting it right with the initial definition of the program in order to right size the decision in the display later.
For sure. Nick, quick question for you. I know we were talking about like the installation process and the right like environment and the right atmosphere for a DV LED installation. So, and when we talk about DV LED, we constantly talk about flexibility, scalability, etc. So as these are becoming more and more popular, what are some other considerations that integrators need to take into account?
Right. It's, you know, all the factors in the, you know, the environment, right? The lighting, you know, the ambient lighting, you know, there's solutions out there, you know, from manufacturers like Sony where you could have specialized, you know, coating that'll be reflective surfaces, high brightness. There's different ranges of, you know, products out there that are, you know, allowing us to put that technology in other spaces like we talked about earlier that we haven't been able to in the past. But definitely architecturally, and the you know, the location, you know, how are we going to mount it, where the power supply and the video equipment is going to be, you know, the support structure, all that kind of play, you know, the heat load, you know, how are we going to, you know, compensate for that? All those factors play into what the integrator and the consultants need to think about when we're designing these solutions. So yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Jeff, I wanted to bring you in here. So
Sure.
I know that you're a big part of the installation process as well. So I wanted to ask you, what innovations have happened to make like LED video wall installations faster and easier in recent years?
Well, it depends on the solution type. So, you know, the question really falls into, you know, what exactly is the main objective of the wall? Is it a conference room, boardroom setting where you're putting up a 16:9 solution, or is it a custom solution from the ground up? So let's start with the conference room, boardroom scenario. A purpose-built mount is really important in those environments. And what I mean by that is, you know, you bring in a lot of intangibles into the mix. So, for instance, you want a solution that is going to be easy to install, but, you know, going a step further. So, such as when you open the box, are the parts you're pulling out of the box the first pieces you put on the wall? They really should be, because a conference room is not that big. I'm in one right now, and if we put a large video wall up, you know, there would be cabinets placed everywhere. There would be very little room to lay out the mount on the floor. And when installing, a lot of folks want to visually see it first. And you sort of cannot do that with a restricted room environment. So, you know, pulling those pieces out of the box need to be the order in which those parts go on the wall. You need installation instructions that make it very easy to put the additional pieces on the wall once you start moving forward. And this piece of the puzzle needs to be done very quickly. Everyone is going to be itching to get cabinets on the wall next. So there's intangibles. You want light parts, you want packaging that's going to be received all in one box. There are instances where sometimes multiple boxes get shipped to a site for the mount, and that's not really good, because if you have 2, 3, 4 boxes, then you're taking everything out of the box and you got to lay it out. You want one box, you want to pull the pieces out, put them on the wall, in the order in which you take them out of the box. You want that efficiency.
Yeah.
So that's an intangible, but it's still very, very important. When you do large custom solutions, you do typically have more space, and in those instances, you do have to lay out solutions. Maybe you don't have to utilize a big space, but they still need to be purpose-driven for the install that you're doing.
For sure. I also wanted to ask about, safety considerations during these type of installations. I know you guys have been talking about like the heat load that you need to take into account with DV LED. So have there been any recent changes, developments, or any type of standardization for maintaining safety during video wall installations?
Usually you get direction from the general contractor if it is a large install on safety precautions. So you'll need a hard hat, for instance.
Yeah.
You might need other equipment from a protection perspective. Usually in large installs, there might be a lift where people have to go up several feet to install bracketry. So you definitely need to follow the lead of the general contractor and the safety precautions for all that equipment being used to mount both the mounting apparatus and the cabinets into the mount itself. So safety is very, very important. And then for the smaller jobs, I'm not going to say that safety isn't as important, but there's less items to really be concerned about. And then with the pandemic, you definitely want to understand where you're going in the environment you're entering, and be prepared for what you're about to face. Do you have to have your vaccination card with you, for instance? Do you need PPE? All those sorts of things in our world today have to definitely be asked about prior to leaving for that job.
For sure.
Hey, Steph, could I just jump back to the innovations in terms of speed and ease of installation? Jeff brought up a really important point, and it's not only for the frames or the structure, but the actual LED wall itself. Very similar. We have a very similar process with our CLED product, where the components come out of the box in the order in which they are mounted to the frame. And I think in general, what we've seen is that companies like Peerless and Jeff and his counterparts have done just a great job at simplifying the structure, the exoskeleton, if you will. And I think that maybe another trend is the ability to have kitted solutions, especially for the smaller wall sizes, for boardrooms and conference rooms and so on, and make it easier for systems integrators to be able just to kind of one-stop shop it and get everything they need. And I think that goes a long way to making the installations just easier and simpler. Yeah, as the trend of adoption that we spoke about in the beginning continues to increase, and direct view maybe supplants other types of display technologies.
Right.
That's, we've got to make it easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely one of, I look back over the past, decade or so where, there's many manufacturers that came out, obviously with HD-based T. Many manufacturers came out with AVA over IP encoder decoder solutions. Now we're seeing a huge amount of manufacturers with DV LED solutions. And so one of the biggest trends is that those manufacturers are coming out with kind of all-in-one solutions that will make the installation more like a large, 86-inch, 98-inch display installation. So cuts down the time of getting the equipment, the mount, the modules, all that put together, hung on the wall, versus, say 5 years ago where you have a real customized DV LED solution. It's gotten much easier to install. We don't have to send a team of, 2 to 4 people to hang a 130-inch display for 4 days. It's much faster now. And so that plays a factor in the pricing as well, not only the hardware, but also the installation and support of these systems.
The only other thing I can offer regarding safety is depending on where in the world we're working, seismic criteria must need to be met. The display is modular and consists of pieces that are designed beautifully for interchangeability. Those modules must never fall unintentionally, and the criteria that needs to support that is very much regional in the world and worth mentioning in the safety conversation.
For sure. So we have another question from the audience, if that's okay, that I can just toss in here. So from Nate, he asked, why would or should a company spend more money to put in higher quality displays when everyone who walks into the meeting room has a computer and can see everything right in front of them?
That's good.
I'll jump in here and just add my thoughts. I think, again, it was great the way we sort of, you, Steph, laid out the order of the questions here, because I think it goes back to that very first question in terms of the applications and again content, right? I mean, that's
right.
So important. The experience, and both of those are going to really speak to the experience, and that's what we're creating here. The immersiveness, the ability to I think to convey more than just information, but also at times even an emotion.
Yeah.
Now I'll toss it to Rob maybe to speak a bit more about that.
I mean, I hear so many levels and layers to that question. I think it's a fantastic question, and it cuts to the core of one that we hear often, which is not just about DV LED. It's about any experience in a room other than what you see in that rectangle in front of you increasingly every day. We live our lives, work and otherwise, now increasingly in these digital platforms. Why should I go to the office? Why should I go to a meeting room? What's the purpose of a boardroom when the camera view is just this extrapolated ants on a log view of tiny faces? It's better sitting at home in every way, arguably. That's one side of it. And of course, the answer is, just as John was saying, there has to be some other reason to go to these rooms and to look to a particular point of focus, a person presenting. And that person presenting increasingly is supported by media content and images of others. And are we going to look down at our device, or are we going to look to the wall, to the person leading the discussion, or to the other individual in the room who has the floor? It's a very deep question, and it's not a simple answer. And I love that it's difficult, because that's the reason for these design debates and discussions. And I should point out the need for consultants and integrators.
Exactly.
One thing I'd like to throw in, if I could, is, in my personal life, I really enjoy live music. And these days, I'm starting to pick those events based on the technology that'll be at the show versus just the music itself. I want to see live music with a massive canvas behind the act to, add to the overall experience. So, the same is true here. Conference room, boardroom, it could be a casino, it could be a lobby, it could be a sports betting facility. I want to go to those facilities that will give me the best experience. And, when you talk about the actual technology itself, you can turn to like specs such as 100,000 hours of half-life with LED versus probably 50,000 hours with LCD. So there is a longevity play here too. You're investing more money up front. You're going to create theater. You're going to create an incredible experience for the users. Plus, you will have a much longer time of product operating within specifications to withstand any future new standards that come down the pipe.
Yeah, and I would just add, when you go into a conference space, you're going in, for that experience with the individual you're meeting with. You're having those conversations with the people in the room. You're going to have remote participants. Yes, you could have your monitor up, but if everyone's plugged in on the same Teams call or Zoom call on their laptop in a conference room, we're kind of defeating the purpose of getting back in the workplace, communicating, collaborating, and taking advantage of the best display experience. Looking at DV LED versus LCD video walls with the crosshairs. That experience just improves tenfold with that alone. And then the brightness, the contrast, the size, it brings it all together so that you can really have that more immersive meeting room experience.
Agreed.
I want to mention one last thing. This is Nate's question, right?
Yes.
Whether it's Formula One racing or rock concerts or cinema, the competition that the industry is suffering, each respective entertainment venue is suffering, is to get you away from these devices where you have ample data and applications and information and interstitial little bits of content here or on your laptop. How do we get the audience and the fans out to the venue to see the real thing when they're essentially giving up this? And DV LED is one important dimension of that, providing a canvas. I'm reminded, John, of the Sony CLED. Here, now we have DCI color compliant digital canvases for cinema. That can be a thing that incorporates other data sets, et cetera. So that there are many dimensions to this question. I like it a lot.
Oh, yeah. Like, this has affected probably all of us in every single way possible. And like that, I just would like to say that, yeah, just because I can watch everything and look at everything on my laptop doesn't mean I want to. Like, I've been doing that for the past 2 years. I'm over it. Like, if there is a direct view LED system that can make a meeting so much easier, where I can sit and feel connected to my coworkers while the ones at home can be there with me, why wouldn't you do that instead of just sitting on your laptop? You know what I mean?
Yeah. We have team members that are itching to, get back in the office for a change of pace. I think there is some fatigue when it comes to the number of meetings. When we talk about return to workplace, just in general, that it can't really happen until we, look at our meeting behaviors and shift gears a little bit, and not be booked back to back on, different collaboration, video calls.
Exactly. So we have another audience question, this time from Gary. He says, this might be a dumb question, but what can I use as a pointer on the direct view LED wall? A laser pointer does not work. And we just installed two 32x9 walls in lecture halls, and they're bright and brilliant. We do love them because windows and lights have very little effect on them.
Well, the first answer is there is such a thing as a bright enough laser that will illuminate any surface. So the question is whether it's safe.
Yeah, for sure. Don't want to burn a hole through it.
Yeah, I think other interactive capabilities, whether it's built into the video wall processing platform, where you can have some interactivity, whether it's some sort of some device that you're holding, or an overlay or a frame, that you can utilize. We've done things like that in the past. I'm not thinking of any examples that I've been involved in recently where that has come up, but that's definitely a good question.
We've actually worked together with a signage partner who has a solution where can actually use your phone as almost as a touchpad that will allow you to have a visual pointer and move it around as a as a mouse or some kind of indicator. So that may be a solution as well for
That way.
Gary. Yeah.
Yeah, and that way you don't have to burn a hole through your screen getting a really bright laser. So I wanted to also ask, just because I know you touched on the supply chain crisis a little bit earlier, and this is just something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. So I wanted to ask, like, with this and specifically with semiconductors, how has this affected LEDs in particular?
Let me jump in as a manufacturer and then turn it over to the rest of the group. But I would say, in general, our supply chain relative to direct view LED has been, for the most part, good. We've been able to manage it. We've been able to deliver within the timeframes that we've promised. Excuse me, but I do think that there's a couple of things that, as a manufacturer, are really key. One is, as we spoke before, the early engagement. But the other thing is complete transparency.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think that there's anything more important than that. As a representative of my company to folks like Nick and his integration firm, and Rob, and certainly being able to provide his client with the absolute truth. I think that transparency really, really is key, and close communication. And I think being able to provide both a standard delivery time frame, if you will, and maybe even a worst case scenario, so that everyone can make an informed decision, and we all go into this with expectations that are realistic. But like any other manufacturer who utilizes semiconductor components, we're managing and closely watching our supply chain, our inventory, and again, working very closely with our partners to make sure that we can forecast back. So I'll just toss it out to the rest of the group.
Yeah, totally agree, John. I mean, that's one of the key things we talked about is communication early, and I think we've had the benefit of that because with DV LED installations, the lead time to get everything coordinated and get the product built and shipped. It's not like some of the other products that we're dealing with on the integration side where we need a massive quantity of them tomorrow. It's something that we're planning well in advance for. So we haven't generally seen a huge delay from the DV LED side, just because we have been planning ahead for that. Mm-hmm. Certainly, just the logistics in general, from shipping from different manufacturers, that's affected everything as well. But from a lead time perspective, I think the proper planning has reduced the impact on the components, at least for DV LED versus other products.
Yeah, I appreciate everything that's said here for sure. From our perspective, it's absolutely what John and Nick are talking about: the prior planning, the design with an understanding that quotations have to be solicited very early in the process, especially for complex canvases, and then ultimately the need for the transparency. And then our role as the consultant, if it has to be, sometimes it's just to be the best bearer of bad news to the client, and to explain as early as possible and take that transparency and communicate it, and to be the conduit. And that's been the outcome in some cases, but we see improvements, hopefully not too long.
From the mount side of things, there's plenty of work to do during that timetable if you have to wait for product. So for instance, we have a pretty lengthy checklist of items that need to go through. We need to do a site survey in a lot of cases. We ask a lot of questions about the wall. Is the wall reinforced? Does it need to be reinforced? If it does, when will that take place? So there's a lot of preparation going on from the moment a purchase order for the display is placed or a commitment, and preparing to mount that display from our side of things. So it's not like buying LCD video wall solutions where maybe you're buying a kit and the mount comes with it and you just need a piece of plywood on the wall. There's a lot of things involved.
Yeah, agreed. So I also wanted to ask how COVID has affected the sales cycle of large scale LED products or projects, I meant.
Yeah, I think from the integration side, it obviously when COVID first hit, it put a hold on a lot of projects. So, almost I'd probably say the majority, if not all, integrators were definitely, had to fight through that battle. And a lot of our end users were basically putting things on hold until things, were a little bit more clear as to the situation. And that's slowly been picking up, and until recently, the last, I'd say 6 months or so, things have picked up tremendously. And some of the trends we talked about earlier are what's driving the increase in terms of the deployments, to date. So,
I'm noticing two aspects to the COVID, and it says, as Nick said in the beginning, there were delays, but I think, so now certainly I think in a way some of the floodgates have opened up, and we're starting to see more and more projects that were on hold start to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that we're seeing is the construction aspect. The actual construction projects themselves, and whether these are either greenfield sites or sites that are going through some significant restructuring, then that's kind of compounded some of the. So it's not only just the client not wanting to release the funds, but also the actual construction delays that resulted as a result as a result of COVID.
I can offer for as consultants engaged in design and construction, which was then in turn stopped because of COVID, dialing the clock back almost 2 years, actually 2 years. In many cases, we took a pause on a design or construction cycle and then changed our scope of work as consultants into strategy, and began looking at the underlying business case and the purpose of a system design, and analyzing things for their root causes, and ultimately deciding maybe we need to be more resilient and defensive in our designs, planning for the unforeseen. Of course, expecting that would not be a need for much more than a few months. And that now is, I want to point out, is the normal. And so every digital canvas, everything that we specify that has real infrastructure impact is considered potentially as a volatile program element that could change because of some new catastrophe or world event or what have you. And we're seeing this every week, it seems, lately. But so that's what I'm reminded of when asked what was our response because of the COVID change.
Yep. So did anyone else want to take that one? I wanted to ask everyone just to go around and say like what imminent technology in the LED market you guys are most excited about. We talked about a lot of trends, so wanted to ask about what new things are out there that y'all are really excited about coming out.
I mean, I'm just looking forward to the continued innovation in the different solutions from the manufacturers, how we can continue to drive the pixel pitch lower, create more unique experiences for our customers, and continue to see that price decrease as manufacturing costs can decrease, so that we can get this technology out there in more applications.
For sure. John, I'm interested to hear what you think.
Sure. So obviously I don't want to be too much of a homer, but of course at Sony we're extremely excited about our second generation of CLED technology.
Mm-hmm.
I have sort of this standard elevator pitch that I give when I start out talking about CLED, and what I've come to call CLED Classic, which was our first generation ZRD2. And I would always say that everyone who heard about it wanted to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who saw it wanted it, but not everybody who wanted it could afford it. I mean, it truly was the Ferrari. But now we've got our next generation of CLED, and I think that it's significant in that not only does it provide great quality at a lower cost, but going back to what you said before about the need for maybe different types of solutions, we've got solutions that are targeted specifically towards virtual production or high brightness areas in our CLED, our CLED B. And then we've got CLED C, which is the higher contrast model, and both of those are enabled via some very specialized coatings. But in terms of maybe broadening it outside of the Sony world, and just taking a look at what I'm also very excited about is, as was mentioned before, the ability for us to partner and for great designers and integrators like Rob and Nick's firms to be able to come together with partners that now enable much more of an interactive experience. So I'm really excited not only about our display technology, but about some of the partnerships that we're working on with respect to some of the IoT solutions that can give the viewer, or again, as I said before, maybe even the participant, a much more personalized and interactive experience.
Right. Jeff, what do you think?
I'm really excited about the content area. I think that if you have seen some of the content in Times Square, it is phenomenal. It looks like objects are jumping out at you. There's really been this resurgence of three-dimensional content, and to me, it's really exciting to see that kind of activity take place on a digital canvas. This display category is probably the most interesting and fastest growing category in the last 20 years in the display industry as a whole. So taking it to the third and fourth level with beautiful content, I think is really exciting, really neat to see. The other thing is being able to create, from a hardware perspective, phenomenal environments where there are LEDs on the floor, the ceiling, shapes are made, rounded corners, all the like. I believe that the creativity of the install from a hardware and software perspective is going to be just phenomenal over the next 5 years. We're going to see a lot of innovation from that perspective.
For sure. And last but not least, Rob.
Building on what Jeff was describing, I'm very excited about deeper integrations and cohesiveness with architecture. The notion of digital architecture and pixels being applied to surfaces, not indiscriminately, but in support of a real program requirement. Integration of these pixel canvases also with the platforms that we're now relying on increasingly. Microsoft, Cisco, Zoom, and the next one. The notion that we're now broken away from the fixed aspect ratio that owes its origins to broadcast television, and we can look at the requirement for many different individual thumbnail windows, each with their own camera sectioned out of a pixel block of the display itself. If we have a platform that controls the black space on a wall, we can start to put cameras inside of the display and solve the eye contact issue across multiple far-end participants, maybe. Those kinds of things that you can't do with off-the-shelf fixed transmissive LCD and other technologies, and also for which projection may not be appropriate. DV-LED is an interesting outcome.
For sure. That leads me to my next question I wanted to ask you guys. I feel like this is always something that people ask. So do you guys think that DV-LEDs will eventually, or could eventually, totally replace projectors?
I mean,
First,
go ahead, Rob.
no, I just couldn't resist the joke. The first moment I say yes, we're going to have a requirement for a projector.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be an application for projection and some of these other technologies, right? Whether it's the vertical that it's being installed in, there's 3D projection mapping applications, there's exterior, projection mapping, there's going to be cost implications. So we're not necessarily always going to, have an infinite budget to have a 320-inch, direct view LED wall, right? So I think there's certainly, that technology can certainly be utilized in many different applications, and it's something to weigh when we're designing solutions for our customers. But I do feel DV LED will continue to progress and evolve. That it will, that technology in one form or another will maybe combined with other technologies will replace your traditional LCD monitors. That's where I think we're going to start seeing more from DV LED.
Yeah.
I agree. I think also we should be mindful that the technology advancements in the semiconductor world that propel DV LED and LCD will also propel projection, at least for the near term. Light sources and so forth will start to improve also with projection as they do for DV LED. And museum and cultural and other applications for which projection is the requirement because of geometric surfaces and other applications that are not just rote flat canvases. I do think projection remains relevant for sure.
I think when you're also looking at higher resolutions in smaller screen sizes, there's a challenge still there that that projection right now is probably the best to address.
Right. So maybe in like the next 10 years, but not anytime soon. So I also wanted to ask, so what is the potential longevity of DV LED displays for the life cycles of larger systems design? So for example, when you put together a conference room installation, no one expects that technology to last for 15 years, but with DV LED, I feel like there's a little more potential there. So what are we looking at with DV LED?
I think Jeff actually mentioned the spec before, and what we're quoting in terms of half-life, at least on light output, is about 100,000 hours.
Right.
So there's great potential for longevity, for sure.
Yeah, I think some of the other things to consider are going to be the type of content that's displayed, what the cooling mechanism is for the system, what other components are in there. Certainly, I think the DV LED components themselves have the potential to last a very long time. Some of the other parts in the chain may be the issue in those instances when we talk about longevity. But ultimately, I think the general rule of thumb of this display technology is going to last a very long time compared to traditional LCD and some projection solutions.
Yeah, there's a very strong linkage. I'm not an engineer, but from my perspective as an outsider, there's a very strong relationship between developments in the semiconductor component industry and DV LED. Like gallium nitride is starting to become popular in power supplies, and you're going to see a power brick not much bigger than what used to charge your phone can now charge your laptop because of increased thermal efficiency at the component level. We're looking forward to these efficiencies being applied to the canvases so that the longevity and John's half-life figures can start to improve for a given brightness.
For sure.
We're excited about that.
So one last question I will ask here, and in terms of specs, do you think that dealers and end users, and I know that they spend a lot of time talking about pixel pitch and that's very important, but do you think that that's focused on too much as the most important specification?
Yes. I would just quickly say yes, only because I think there's so much more to it. There's dynamic range, there is viewing angle, there's viewing distance, and again, going back to the CLED Classic, many people who saw it really didn't believe that it was 1.2 millimeter pixel pitch. So,
right.
but I'll throw it out to the rest of the team for their comments.
Yeah, I see a lot pixel pitch and also the cost. Those are the two number one. The top two things that are brought up in the discussion. And so, and also the viewing distance, we try to bring them back to, hey, the viewing distance, the right pitch for the environment and what you're looking to do in that space. Who's going to be, what are the work functions, the experience that we're trying to attain before we really start going down the weeds in the pixel pitch. But definitely comes up along with the price.
Yeah, pixel pitch is either important or not, depending on other criteria, among them viewing distance. And so the argument could be made that it's not something to be considered in isolation of or in advance of other more critical facets of the installation, such as the interior design, the furnishings, the user experience expectation, the content, and all the things we've been talking about here. So it's on the list, but it's not necessarily at the top, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
I would agree with everything that was said. One thing that we've been taught to use is the viewing distance calculation, which is every millimeter of pixel pitch sort of equates to 7 to 10 feet away from the screen. So, pixel pitch, I think, from a hardware perspective, has been maybe overplayed a bit to help develop that viewing distance, and it's somewhat hard to get away from it. It is sort of, a nice equation, a simple calculation to use to understand, based on where the audience will be, what that pixel pitch should be, which then equates to, a category of product and a price point of product that you might need for the application. So it does help end clients and integrators recommend the right product for the job. And, it's sort of, one can avoid from overspending maybe on the product that they need for the particular installation.
For sure. Well, I think we are about out of time, so I just wanted to quickly ask if y'all had any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to make sure we touch on before I let y'all get back to it.
One thing I would say is, from a mounting perspective, really look at the relationship that has been developed between that manufacturer and the display company. It is important. A lot of people in the marketplace say, they support and their products are compatible with, let's say, the top 10 providers of display technology. And that might be true, but you sort of want to dig deeper and understand what relationship or what type of relationship and how intimate that relationship is between the mount manufacturer and the display company. The closer they are together, working together and sort of having a certified product, the better the chances are that the solution will be perfect right out of the box and there won't be any sort of gotchas on the back end.
For sure.
I just want to say, on behalf of the consultant representation here, many thanks to the manufacturers, both on the panel and in the audience, as well as the integrators. Without all of the support in our very seemingly small industry, actually, we wouldn't be meeting these challenges that we receive from our clients, and it's much appreciated.
Nick?
Yeah, I think we hit all the major points. I mean, definitely consider all the factors that are going to play a part in these direct view LED solutions. Content, infrastructure, processing to for the non-standard aspect ratios. And I'd echo Rob's comment. Thank you to the manufacturers for continuing to innovate in the technology and come out with these great solutions that we can provide our customers.
For sure. John?
Yeah, just a quick thanks. I echo what Nick and Rob have already said. Thanks to everyone who participated in the panel. And again, I appreciate what Jeff said as well about the alliances and the partnerships that exist and are necessary to make this all work as an ecosystem, But one other thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you, Steph, and Gary and Rave for not only for providing this opportunity, but for doing what you guys consistently do, which is to educate. And I think that's the most important thing. As I mentioned, before, I think it's all of our jobs to educate the industry and educate our architectural partners as well, so they can really better understand how to integrate AV into their plans. So, thank you.
Thanks, you guys. No, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and the audience has been chatting amongst themselves too, and I know they've enjoyed it as well. So thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.